Before Johnny Depp was playing Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean, the most iconic pirate was Long John Silver from Robert Louis Stevenson's 1883 novel Treasure Island. Now, this is a story that established many of the tropes that we've come to know from pirates, such as the pirate with one leg, the bird on the shoulder, using a map to look for buried treasure. And this is a novel that's been adapted many times to the screen, but for this week's retro review, I decided to take a look at the adaptation that's usually considered to be one of the most faithful one, which is 1990's Treasure Island, starring Charlton Heston as the iconic pirate Long John Silver, as well as a young Christian Bale, and this is a film directed by Fraser Heston, Charlton Heston's son. Up until recently, I've never heard about this version of Treasure Island. I knew there was many adaptations of it, but I just stumbled across the trailer one day on YouTube and I saw that it was starring Charlton Heston, Christian Bale, you got Oliver Reed in it, Christopher Lee, and I was like, wow, this is a fantastic cast. How have I not seen this movie before? So I decided to check it out, and lo and behold, it's actually pretty decent. For those who aren't familiar with Treasure Island, it's actually a pretty simple story. It starts off with the boy named Jim Hawkins, played by Christian Bale, managing an inn with his mother. And then one day, an old seafaring man who calls himself the captain shows up with a large chest and decides to rent a room from them and stay there for a long period of time. All day, he seems to be keeping a lookout over the sea with his spyglass, and at night, he basically becomes a drunken nuisance at their bar. And when I was watching this, I couldn't help but think that Oliver Reed was probably the perfect casting choice for this. Like, I don't even know if he was really acting or if they just told him to go out to the pub with his pirate costume and then they just brought cameras with them.
15 men on the dead man's chest. Stick to the devil and have done with the rest.
Then one night, a pirate shows up and identifies the captain as Billy Bones, an old crewmate of his when they sailed under the notorious Captain Flint. The two have a sword fight. This pirate flees, but Billy is now going into cardiac arrest. Before Jim can get help, an old man named Blind Pew catches him and forces Jim to bring him to Billy. Blind Pew then gives Billy the black spot before leaving. This is basically telling Billy that he's marked for death by his old crew, but before his old crew can arrive to finish him off, he gives his key to the chest to Jim and then he dies from his heart attack. Jim and his mother decide to look through Billy's chest and discover a packet of papers which Jim takes. Then the pirates attack their inn and Jim and his mother are forced to fend them off until help arrives. During the fighting, Blind Pew gets killed and the rest of the pirates flee. Jim and Dr. Livesey, a local magistrate, decide to take the papers that Jim got from Billy to Squire Trelawney, a wealthy landowner and friend of the doctor's. There, the three discover there is a map to Captain Flint's buried treasure, so Trelawney commissions a ship and a captain to set sail and find the treasure. In order to find a crew for this ship, Trelawney is approached by Long John Silver, who presents himself as a retired sailor who's now disabled and just runs a pub. He says that he can find a crew for that ship and he'll actually come aboard himself as the ship's cook. Trelawney is sort of gullible, so he decides to accept that offer, and this is actually a big mistake on his part because it turns out that Long John Silver is actually a pirate captain in charge of a group of pirates that were after Billy Bones trying to find the map to Captain Flint's treasure. So now you have these two different groups of people on board this ship looking for the same treasure. One is just a bunch of English gentlemen, and the other is a group of pirates who are planning on mutinying against them once they get to the island. This is probably as much of the plot as I'm willing to go over without getting into the spoiler territory, but if it sounds interesting to you, then I recommend checking out the movie because it is pretty enjoyable. Right off the bat, I really love the overall art design of this movie, whether it's the settings, the ship, or even the costumes. I think it'd be too easy for a movie like this to kind of fall into the stereotypical pirate look category, but I think they found a good fine line between that where it sort of has that campy look to it, but at the same time, it also has sort of a realism as well. Kind of to piggyback off that, I also like the sequence when they're setting sail from England where they showed the crew actually getting the ship ready to move. You know, how they're getting the anchor up, taking the sails down. It might be a little drawn out and unnecessary to the overall story. And if this is a movie that you had to trim for time, then you probably could cut this out entirely. But I thought it was interesting to watch, and it really just goes to show how professional this pirate crew is because they obviously know what they're doing when it comes to a ship. And this is something that Jim learns from them, not only during this sequence, but also during the trip to the island. So you can see how Jim is actually a clever character and someone who's very observant and who's a fast learner. I already talked about the casting of this movie and how that's what drew me to it. And I got to tell you, they did not disappoint. I think everyone did a fantastic performance, and hats off to Charlton Heston for playing Long John Silver because The man just dominated the screen from every scene that he's in, from the first moment that he shows up on screen until the very end of the movie. The guy just has a presence about him, and it's not like he's playing an easy character either. Yes, Long John Silver is a vicious pirate, but he's not just entirely evil. He does have a soft spot for someone like Jim, and he actually tries to take care of him throughout the movie, even to his own detriment. So it just goes to show that there's a little bit more to this character than what you initially perceive. And everyone knows Christian Bale's a good actor because he's won an Oscar, so he has to have some talent. But this movie, I think, just goes to show how much of a natural he actually is, because he's able to hold his own in a cast of a bunch of amazing actors, and you can actually see his character growth from the start of the movie to the end of the movie as a result of all the things that he has to go through throughout it. The action scenes in this movie are also really well done, especially the big battle that happens sort of near the end of the second act. I was watching it and I was thinking to myself, if this movie was to be made now, how would they actually improve this battle with the technology that we have right now? And, in all honesty, I don't think they really could. I think it has exactly what we need, which is just a bunch of practical effects and explosions. Maybe they can improve some of the fight choreography, but I actually liked how it looked in this movie, because even though it wasn't like choreographed and it looked pretty awkward and clumsy, I think it worked with the situation in this movie, because a lot of these guys in this movie aren't necessarily trained fighters. They're basically just a bunch of English gentlemen trying to defend themselves against a bunch of pirates who are trying to kill them. So it would look a little bit awkward and forced and unnatural to them, because it is unnatural to them. Some criticism I have for this movie is I do think they could have tightened it up a little bit. And I do know I said earlier that I like watching things play out when they're getting the ship ready, but other situations I did find myself getting kind of bored because things were just getting drawn out a little bit longer than I think needed to be. This movie is around 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I do think they probably could have cut a half hour off of the time and actually just made things kind of flow a lot better. There was also some character actions that I found kind of questionable and dumb, but that's less of a problem with this movie and more of a problem with the original story. I know the filmmakers could have tried to just fix that themselves, but if a filmmaker has to be in a situation where they're like, well, we can try to improve the source material or be faithful to it, I would always encourage filmmakers to err on the side of just being as faithful to the source material as possible. In the end, I did enjoy this movie. There's nothing super complex with it. It's just a fun pirate adventure movie. And if you're kind of in the mood for that sort of thing, then I do recommend 1990's Treasure Island. Or if you're actually a fan of the Pirates of the Caribbean one and you haven't seen this movie, then I do think you should check this one out too, because if you enjoyed that, I think you would enjoy this one too. And also just kind of see the origin for a lot of the pirate tropes if you're not necessarily aware of where they came from. And that's why I'll give this movie a 7 out of 10. But let me know what you think about this movie in the comment section below. If you've seen it, or have you not seen it, or do you plan on actually watching this now that you know that this movie exists, kind of like me? Like, once I found out this movie exists, I was like, oh, I gotta check it out. It looks pretty cool. And yes, it was. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news, or check out some more of my movie reviews. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that like button and share the video out there with your friends, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.